Good evening, everyone. TGT Media is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are on episode 317 now, and we're joined today by a very, very talented person in his own right. You know his work from, of course, The Norm. You have seen his work, of course, on the very popular Indiegogo campaign that has just been successfully funded, if I can talk. We're joined today by Michael Jantze. How are you doing today?
Kurt, I'm doing fine. How are you?
Awesome. Thanks for asking. I've been following your stuff for a while, ever since Tom kind of put me on your trail, because that's Tom Racine from Tall Tale Radio.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a fan of not only your sense of humor, but your cartooning aspect here. But let's kind of take a look at your Indiegogo campaign here with, it's called Knocked, I'm going to get this messed up. It's Knocked Out.
Loaded. Yeah, you got it.
Knocked Out Loaded. All right.
Yeah.
Tell us why you wanted to use Kickstarter to put together this book.
Well, this was,
or Indiegogo, sorry.
Yeah, Indiegogo's fine too. The reason to do it this way was, I think I'm just sort of finishing an idea versus, absolutely certain that I'm publishing something. So this was a way to kind of just get something over with instead of running back out and pitching it to people and trying to sell it to a publisher or going through other avenues. It just seemed like sort of a personal project I wanted to finish. Indiegogo's, I was introduced through Tom and Ann Hambrock, Ann Morris Hambrock, I should say, John Hambrock's wife. And they had tried it for their own campaigns and seemed like a fairly easy way and honest way to kind of connect with people and get your stuff out there.
Now, being a cartoonist of many years here, when was the norm from an idea? When did it become an idea and go to an actual reality for you?
So I was submitting strips from about 1990 on, and Norm was syndicated in 96. As a comic, Norm, let's see, when did I start Norm? I started Norm in 1995, so I had started working on it about early 1995, I started working on an idea. It goes back a little further where when I was working, I had a deal with DC Comics. I was finishing up a syndicate development deal with United Media at the time. For an earlier strip, kind of a continuation of my college strip. And I kind of felt like I had written myself out of that idea, the way we developed it. And so I started with, I took I think I got it right here actually. I took an old spiral sketchbook like this, which didn't have this logo on it. But I took just a sketchbook and I decided, instead of trying to write jokes and be funny and try to be humorous and be a comedy writer, that I'd just keep a journal. The journal was essentially all I had to do was draw on it every day, and I got rid of the idea of being funny. That I would just write down ideas and write a little bit about my life. So shortly after that, I met my wife, and she started creeping into it a little bit. And as we got married, I started working on this idea of, I decided to start Norm back when he was single, since I was out of that world and I could kind of just make absolute complete fun of dating and the late 90s and what was going on at the time. So it started as sort of a journal and developed slowly into my next comic strip idea.
And 16 years later, so to speak, here you are. It's amazing. That's a heck of a path, especially with all of the social, economic turmoil, and of course, yourself doing this as a comic in general.
Mm-hmm.
The things that we've seen in those decades are amazing now. With this type of comic, obviously, comedy is hard to write, and you were just going just on a day-to-day basis, which is, I think, the most freeing aspect of a creator. You don't have to worry about sticking to any sort of script.
It is and it isn't. I joke that I come from two families that were farmers, and I joke that I think I found the one profession where it's the closest to farming. You really don't take a vacation when you're doing the daily comic strip. When I signed with King Features in 96, yeah, the strip started in 96. It was a 15-year contract with an eight-year break in it. And when we got to 8 years, my wife and I had sort of a handshake that when we got to 5 years, if I hadn't replaced my salary that I was making at Industrial Light and Magic as an art director on Features, that, we needed to reevaluate, what we were doing and where we were going and whether or not the babies were being fed, that sort of thing. So we got to that 5-year break and weren't in the six-figure range that we wanted to be in. We were sort of stuck in this land of about 50 to 60 papers is where the norm was sort of hovering at the time. We had mostly big papers since it was more about, urban living, a guy in a black shirt, sipping coffee and going to work, as a graphic designer. But still, we're just sort of stuck there. And I was out with Stefan Pastis, who was either syndicated or about to be syndicated. I think, I don't know where he was with Pearls Before Swine at the time, but he and I went out and he had counted up all the newspapers that, two things, all the newspapers that had gone out of business in the last 5 years, and also then all the comic strips that either the creator had passed away or retired, but the strip itself hadn't stopped. And I think at the time he had said, we were in the, 4,000 papers sales, or let me say it again, it was about 4,000 newspaper sales that had come and gone that hadn't been ours because nobody had quit, so to speak. And I think that was about 2 years before I decided not to continue the strip in 2006. So that'd be, somewhere around 2003 2004 we had that conversation. And it was a very valid point, which is it's just gotten harder and harder to be successful, and not grossly crazy successful, but just make a living at it. I think even Wiley left San Francisco years ago with when he started up, got years into 5 years or so into his strip, Non Sequitur, and moved to Iowa just so that he could afford to be a cartoonist, because the Bay Area's got a much different, price point for housing and all that stuff. So, very interesting world. There's been so many changes. We haven't even talked about the internet yet. So.
Well, yeah, actually, that's what was transitioning into the next aspect. Yeah. With the internet coming along in the late '90s, early 2000s, obviously, you have the .com boom and bust. God, I was part of that bust. That was cool. But the transition from print to internet, that Wild West atmosphere that, I think is still personally going on, 10 years later. How was that transition for you? Not only as a cartoonist, but as a business person as well.
Actually, good, and yet, I think the best way to say it is, you make your own choices. For me, I was still working at newspapers. I was a graphics editor or artist, depending on where I was at the time. My wife and I had moved from New Orleans back to California to be closer to her family. And I took a step out of management to be able to work on this comic strip daily. I kind of knew, this is pre-web even. This is about 93 or 94 that I told my wife, I said, I'm so close and all I need is a way to publish daily. And so a job opening came up, not at the San Francisco Chronicle, but at a smaller paper, the Marin IJ, which was at the time was an afternoon daily here in Marin County, just over the Golden Gate Bridge. And when I went in for the interview, they had the editor at the time had said, hey, "What are you doing here? You're a graphics editor at the time, speaking. I had a staff of 15, et cetera. Why do you want to come here?" And it was like, I need my life back to work on these comics. I feel like I'm so close, but I just don't have a way to kind of complete this. And so the handshake on the table when I took this job was that they would slide things down in the page. We hadn't really worked it out at the time, but basically they just made some space for me in the IJ Monday through Saturday. And it was essentially a web comic. It was the internet. I just needed a way to work on this thing 6 days a week. And here I came. I think I worked there about a year. I was about 95, and here I came with a pile of strips, finished strips. And he goes, "Oh my God, you're serious." And he looked through me. He these aren't bad, but I thought you were going to like do a local strip. And I go, no. This is just a dry run for syndication. You know, I'm trying to figure out, that's something I've been working on for quite a while. I just need a way to resolve that. And so anyway, I published in the IJ for I think it was about 6 months, and then I sent a batch off to the syndicates, and I had 2 syndicate contracts that time. And Jay Kennedy, I remember Jay called, and he was so excited. He goes, "Oh my gosh," because he was the first guy who had called me in about '89 when I sent in my first submission and said, "Yeah, you know, you're good, and we need to work on this, and I'd be happy to, you know, help you with this, but you know, keep working. You're going to make it." And he was so excited. I mean, honestly, I think he was happier than I was. Like, "Oh my God, you figured it out!" and so that was sort of the beginning of that, and that was my way of doing what most people do with the web now, and my students down at SCAD did, which is, you know, you need a way to kind of gain your craft. There aren't really a lot of assistant jobs. It used to be, you know, you were a journeyman or something, and you worked for Milton Caniff, and you lettered for him, and then you drew backgrounds, or you know, whatever. And these days, it's tough. Colleges don't have a lot of campus newspapers because the politics changed there. I know that at the school that I went to, they closed the campus paper over, you know, just the politics of journalism on campus and who owned the paper and who owned the stories and all that weirdness. And so, you know, the world just keeps changing. So, I mean, that was a partial answer.
No, it was good though. You know, I find that with the way business is, or I should say, the way entrepreneurs, the way we as craftsmen, people, I should say, craftspeople of our various professions, you being in comics, myself being interviewing, you know, you have to do things yourself. You have to be the ones that set your own path. And you're right, it is difficult. Even nowadays, it's extremely difficult.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
So just, you know, I think that's where the world changed. And when I got out of college in '85, the self-publishing boom with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and this sort of stuff was all happening, and that's what I did. I self-published a book of cartoons that were a continuation of my college comic strip, and that's what got the interest of DC Comics and the syndicates initially. Was I sent that stuff off. But it was the fact that I had self-published. It wasn't at the time so much that I wanted to make a lot of money at it. I didn't think there was a lot of money in comics, to be honest. I was a film major, and I was planning on, you know, working as a writer or an editor or something in the film industry. And I was living in Los Angeles at the time. But I liked that I could keep drawing and, you know, draw funny pictures as well as, you know, write up the script. So this first property was called Normal USA, and it was kind of like a Little Abner strip. It was part humor and then part storyline. And I had published essentially, I think, about 1/4 of the actual story. And that's what DC was interested in at the time. And I had interest from Jay Kennedy at King and another syndicate. And so I held on to that and sold him another project, et cetera. But yeah, right from the bat, I was into that kind of do-it-yourself stuff. You know, even in '85, it was like the idea of a laser printer and desktop publishing was just awesome. That you could actually make things on your own, and, you know, you didn't have to follow the rules, so to speak. And I think the internet's just sort of amplified that, you know, 1,000 times in so many different directions now, from funding to publishing. Now you don't even have to make a book for people to read you. And I think that idea of lots of craft and sort of a renaissance of craftsmanship and artists, you know, sort of being partially in charge of their livelihood and kind of the direction of their success. It's good. It's good for us. And in essence, anything good for artists has always been good for business. So I don't see it as any of these changes as bad. It just takes a while to kind of, you know, work out business models and all these different ideas.
Do you find with the younger generation that are coming up, do you find that they're sticking to preconceptions about being, like, finding a publisher to publish their work, or do you find that they're trying to break out on their own in their own way?
I think both. It's kind of a cop-out answer, but I taught for 4 years down at the Savannah College of Art and Design, and it was 50-50. There were students that wanted to go work at Pixar, and there were students that wanted to start up their own animation studio, and there were students that wanted to, ink and pencil for Marvel and DC, and bigger houses like Dark Horse, and there was others that just wanted to basically go home, eat the lichen and moss in the basement for a couple of years, and figure out a way to kind of tell their stories, and do it their way. The interesting thing about I think that younger generation is they're not as interested in the object that they're making as that they're telling stories. They don't seem to have that sort of they don't discriminate against where success could be. And I think in my generation, and even cartoonists 20 years younger than me, a lot of people have been really kind of hooked on the idea that they want to make it, quote unquote, big, either with syndication or a book deal or, one of the big book publishers, comic book publishers and so forth. So that's what I think is changing, is sort of that distinction of what is success and how much is enough and how many people, does an audience make.
Do you consider yourself successful?
Oh, yeah. I make a living at it, so. Yeah, I never expected, if people ask if I'd, have the numbers and craziness of a Charles Schulz, let's say, which was, honestly was the bellwether, if I don't even know if that's the right word, but he's the standard. That's what I mean to say of my generation. It was like I'm going to grow up and make as much money as Charles Schulz, and it was like I've never kind of lived in the world of that place where my comics or my stories are so simplified that I can grab that big of an audience. And not saying that Peanuts is a simple strip, but it's very simple to come to. It's probably more like the Beatles than Thelonious Monk. It's more like pop music when you first hear it, and then it gets deeper as you listen to it more and more, or read it more and more. Whereas I've never, gone after sort of that simpler flavor. I've always sort of put these bigger ideas on top of simple story forms, from whether it was Norm or some of the other projects I've worked on. I'm exactly where I think I expected to be. I think most of us always want a bigger audience. But here's the best way to answer that question. Tough question, by the way. The best way to answer this is when I left syndication and did the Norm online for 2 years. We ran essentially a NPR type campaign, and these days it looks just like a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo. So I said this to Tom the other day on his show, is that I think my wife and I kick ourselves that we didn't come up with the business plan idea that is Kickstarter and Indiegogo, even though we were doing it. We had the gifts, we had the levels, we had the perks. It was like the better idea there wasn't, continuing the comic strip as much as this business plan and helping, artists and creators, reach their audiences. But when I left syndication, I left behind, potentially millions of readers. According to editor and publisher, my strip, if you added up the circulation of newspapers, my strip had somewhere in the 25 million readers. Okay. Now, that's what they use to sell advertisements, but it's documented and it's at least there. So potentially, supposedly, 25 million people had glanced through the newspaper or the newspapers I was in. And so when we went to our subscription model, and we did a lock and key thing where you had a password to get in to read the news strips. I think we had 3,000 people, and it was just a very different pipeline. We had a lot of, and what was so cool about it was how intimate it was, but also at the same point, I said to my wife at some point, if I'm still doing this 5 days a week, what was so bad about all those other readers that, we walked away from? Because it turned out that doing a strip 5 days a week was just about as much work as doing the strip 7 days a week with King Features and doing all the business work on myself. And so that's why after 2 years, I kind of got everything to, well, I shut the doors essentially. That's probably the easiest way to say it. and the business, my animation studio business started taking off, and it was just getting harder and harder to balance it, and I was going to have to make a choice, and I chose the studio at the time. So, yeah.
So then, how do you deal with your failures?
You mean all of them, or just one in particular?
In general?
Yeah. I think I told my students this, and this, I really believe this, which is if you're not failing, if you're not hearing the word no, you're not out there. It is a business of no, and it always has been. I mean, when you're in content, whether it's television or books or feature films, writing in general, you're going to hear no. You're going to hear lots and lots of failures, and hopefully you learn from them. And, as your parents say, well, you won't do that again. I mean, that's the smart business person, and the smart artist even is that, why, who was it? Stephen Wright, the stand-up comedian Stephen Wright, if you remember him. He had a great quote that I had hanging above my desk when I was first syndicated, which said, "I'm in the business of laughter. When I tell a joke that doesn't get any laughs, it's not that it wasn't a good joke. It just wasn't the right joke at the right time. It doesn't mean that I'm going to force my audience to like it and that I'm going to explain it to them to get them to laugh, because I don't have the time to do that. So for that reason, I won't do that again." And I thought that was a really good way to accept the idea that even when things are good sometimes, there's failure, that you didn't connect with people, and it's just move on. And, I think finally what he said was something like, it's not my business, or it's not good for my business to create silence as a stand-up comedian. And so anything that's leading down the path towards silence instead of laughter and keeping the audience along with you, don't do that. That makes no sense. I love that quote, and I paraphrased it to a point where you won't find it on Google. So, I apologize, but you get the idea. Oh shoot! Sorry.
No, that's good. I like it.
I think Jesus said something of when he was playing pool. No, it was 9-ball. Anyway, snooker. It was snooker. No, it was Mark. Yeah. Anyway.
It was the poodle playing poker off to the side there.
Somebody on Earth once said,
"Hey, is that my pet rock?"
Yeah. Something. Yeah, sorry.
When it comes to this generation that's coming up here, those that you've had either interacted with through your time as a teacher, or rather through conventions you may attend, how can they inspire the next generation?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I don't know. I think if the real answer is kind of a sucky one, which is just be yourself or something like that. But it's kind of that simple, which is the world doesn't need more of what it already has. It just needs new voices. And it's the reason why publishers still publish and syndicates still syndicate as little as they do, as the same reason that people go to the shows in the first place is that people are looking for voices. They're looking for somebody who has something to say about something. In my writing classes at SCAD, I'd talk a lot about that. If you're not, when you're trying to tell a story, it's not just that it's a cool story and that it has a lot of action in it or really funny jokes. What are you trying to say? What are you mad about? And try to figure out a way to complain creatively. And I think that maybe that's the best answer I can say, which is, if you want to grab an audience and change the world, it's going to be by being yourself and being bold enough to, have a voice and find that and be unique about it. Originality is completely overrated. It's impossible to do. But uniqueness is possible, because that's what makes humans humans, is that we all are unique, and yet we're not that unique that people don't get us when we start telling our stories. Something like that. I don't know.
That's good. I like it. Final question then, I guess, for this is, usually everyone has one or two people that kind of inspire them on their path to their goal, either professionally or personally. Who are they for you?
Oh gosh, that's a good one. Well, one of my heroes was Charles Schulz, and then I was lucky enough to meet him and to know him,
Oh, wow.
both as a amateur cartoonist and a professional cartoonist. He was exactly the person I expected him to be when I met him. His love for comics taught me so much about kind of how to not only how to write and draw, because we had good discussions about that stuff, but I think one of the biggest lessons I got from him was, how to behave as a person. And I was surprised that he picked up the phone that day when I called to see if he'd have lunch with me years ago, long before I had a syndicate contract. I was surprised that he wrote me back, and in fact, here's a fun story. I sent my first batch of stuff out. This is before the internet was invented. And it was about maybe this is 88 or so. And I had finished this book. I think that Normal USA book, Chili Maneuvers, came out in 88. And I had finished this book and I kind of didn't know what to do with it. I had made it for one reason, which was to draw enough strips to send into the syndicates. I was sort of worried personally that you draw 30 strips like I had in college for the comic news, for the college newspaper, and I was afraid it wasn't going to be good, or that I didn't have enough jokes to keep going. And so I had decided, I'll draw 100. If I get to 100, I'll know whether or not if the characters are going to start writing the gags, as people always said. And I got somewhere around 50, and of course, this tells you a lot about me. It's like, well, I'm not just going to draw 100. I'll go ahead and publish the damn thing too. I got this thing because I was working at a government contractor, and they had this huge copier there. And I go, I can just run books here. So I went to my boss and I go, can I run books at night right here? And she goes, yeah, knock yourself out. I went and bought my own paper and had the Xerox guys come in and tune it up. And I bought all the tone. I paid for all the supplies, and basically they paid for the electricity and the wear and tear on the machine. And that's how I self-published. And then I had a printer make the color thing and bind it for me and all that sort of stuff. And that's where I decided, I'll only make 1,000. So they were all numbered and signed and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, yeah, this is what you do when you're getting syndicated. It's busy in here. So I had sent this letter off. I'd sent it off to the syndicates. At the time there was about 10 still. And then I had sent it off to about 10 professional cartoonists. I had found I think I mailed it. With Charles Schulz, I found that he had an address in the phone book. You could look him up, and he was on One Snoopy Lane up in Santa Rosa. So I mailed that there. And most of the other ones had to go through a syndicate to get to the cartoonists, and so it's not their fault that they wrote. But guess who wrote back first? It was Charles Schulz. I get home from work one day, and there's a letter from Charles Schulz in the mail. I was like, oh my, and he's the first one to write back. You're like, oh, the guy. So that was really, those kind of little actions, those little acts that he had of never being too presumptuous about who he was and what he was, but also, really knowing that he was also, the creator of Peanuts and the best cartoonist alive, and probably still the best cartoonist dead. That he knew who he was. You didn't want to be the person that said that he wasn't good anymore, because he'd take you to task for it. So there's one. That was a long answer, but there's been so many after that. Jerry Scott of Zitz was an early. He's the one who got me into the National Cartoonist Society when I had my deal with DC Comics. But some of the editors at DC were great. Andy Helfer was so kind, even though we were basically breaking up when he was my editor. But he was still a great editor and a great person, and really kind of changed my mind about that editors were bad people, because the DC thing was so messed up in the early 90s. They were going out of business every week, and I had a different editor about every month. And Andy came on, and he really kind of calmed that all down enough that he and I could have a conversation. And when he suggested we had to take this 3-part book, this 180-page 3-part book, and basically crammed into a new size and down to a 2-volume thing, I said, that's fine, but you got to pay me to start over. And they go, no, that's not how DC works. And I said, well, but it was just a nice breakup, where we both realized, well, then, we're done. It's time for me to keep going after syndication, and the DC can, make superhero comics. So there's been a lot of really kind people that way. But boy, is there anybody else
How about personally though?
Oh yeah, I don't know anybody personally. I don't like people enough. Yes. Thanks for asking, though.
Yeah, you're welcome.
No. Oh yeah. If you want to go way back, it has to be my high school art teacher. He was also my junior high school teacher, and he came along when I was in about eighth grade or seventh or I think it was eighth grade. Started there. He was the new young teacher at school. He was like 6'8", ex-basketball player, magician, amazing watercolorist, and then potter. Just pottery, just dynamite pottery. But Bob Freeman was his name. He's a principal or a supervisor, a board of education type person up in the Chicago area now in Illinois. But yeah, Bob was that guy who just told me I was good. He was one of those voices in your head that I remembered for years and years. Of like, oh, you can do this. You just need to take a little time and figure out what you want to do. Because I was all over the place. It was like I was making pottery on Monday and doing oil paintings on Tuesday and drawing cartoons all week long, but never finishing any of them. And working in graphite and watercolors and just anything. And he was kind of like, and then animation. I was making films and doing a bunch of animation. And he was the kind of guy like, well, where do you want to, what do you want to work in? What do you want to really do? And at the time, it was like, I want to make movies. And he goes, well, then just do that. Get rid of this other stuff so that you have more time for this. And I think that was one of those great kind of Obi-Wan moments of like, calm down. You get a long run here. I think Bob was that guy. I stayed in touch with him for years and years, and he was just always sort of there to, with the Christmas cards and stuff, to just remind you of, of those crazy days when you were still out of control and felt like you had to boil the ocean. He made it make sense that you were going to have a nice long run. So that's a good one. Thank you for the help with that. That's who I meant.
Is there anything else that you'd love to tell the watchers of this and listeners of the show as well? And anything anything else that you'd love for them to know about?
Well, I do answer my email, so if I'm not one of these snotty cartoonists that gets too busy to answer email, if it takes a little while, it's only because I went on vacation. I think with the Indiegogo thing, let me tell you a little bit about that, which is what we're up to is this was for me to finish this book. I really wanted to get this done. It was something, like I said, it was something that I had started as part of a pitch for DC way back in the late 80s, early 90s. It was something that I brought into the norm when I left syndication in 2006. So, to all the people out there, thank you so much for what you've done and helped me do. And I've got a lot of work to do now. But what we've gone on to with the stretch goals now is to restart the strip. And I don't see a need really for a daily comic strip. And not so much that I don't want to be that busy with a comic. It's just the world's changing. And I think the biggest thing we have to think about as creators, and this is everybody from musicians is going through this to, book writers, the people that don't have pictures in their books, to filmmakers, to anybody that's dealing in content and telling stories, is we have to be, we have to have a reason that people need us. We are a product, we are consumed, and there's no reason to, be the crazy guy out there, on the street with a bunch of pamphlets, comic pamphlets, trying to tell you that, you still need a buggy whip even though you have a car now. We have to be relevant. We have to have a reason that we're doing this. And we have to be important in people's lives. And personally, my opinion is I don't know if people need me daily. And everybody's going to have a different opinion on where comics are needed and how comics are needed and when comics are read. But it's sort of why it's one of the reasons I've been testing and putting these new norm comics for the last 6 months or so up on YouTube as little, I call them comic radios, but they're even further away from the motion stuff than the stuff we've done in the past, is to try to find a way that one person or two people could make something that fits on a screen, because that's where I think people have gone, is we have to be in people's lives when they're looking at us digitally somewhere, whether it's on a computer or a laptop or an iPad or phones and all that sort of stuff. And then things have to be readable in a lot of different sizes. The form factor has changed. We're not just opening a newspaper anymore, and we're not just going to work and not working and reading web comics all morning. And I know all you guys because I used to see my statistics on Monday morning just go through the roof. I know where you were. And it'd bump again at 1 o'clock after lunch. So do not lie to me what you were doing at work. Comic fans have been stealing from corporate America as a solidarity message against the... No, I can't sell it. That's a lie. We are 99% strong. Yeah, no.
And I see a problem with that. How?
No, exactly. Yeah. The worst part is when I work for myself and I'm still stealing from myself, reading webcomics and screwing around on YouTube. So guilty as charged. Mashable, I hate you. I've spent way too much time on there. I decided I have to quit my Mashable habit and a couple other things. So
hook it up to my veins.
Yeah, Gizmodo. Yeah, I got rid of Gizmodo years ago. I weaned myself off that. So
don't hit the Instagrams or the anything like that. Oh boy,
that's my new. Yeah, you're right. My new one is Instagram. I love following hashtags around and seeing what people think. Dappled horse is when there's not a horse in the picture. So it's like, what were you thinking?
The emu was taken, apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
Michael, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. I could talk with you for hours. Literally, it would be awesome. Being a film person myself as well, I'm just getting into this industry, so I think I have some interesting stories to tell, and I'd love to toss them by you someday. But
yeah, we'll have to catch up again and chat offline as well. But
of course. Of course, you can find everything. But I have a bad habit of doing this. What's the website we can go to for a lot of your stuff?
The basic site is either The Norm or michaeljantze.com or jantze.com. And that has all the links everywhere else. So if you eventually need to get to Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, all that, go to jantze.com. It's probably easiest. And if you can't spell that, go to The Norm.
Or if you haven't seen the opening intro of this or read the website, then I must have done something wrong.
Yeah, shame on you. Shame on you. Okay? You're a C student in my mind. So. Come on, follow along here. No, not you. I'm talking about all your... So, yeah, as a professor, the big Jantze steer eventually like, are you kidding me? You didn't do the reading?
Wait,
what am I doing up here? I came to this interview and you're not even going to read the openings?
I was supposed to read what?
You had a 1 second intro or a 10-second intro to watch, and you didn't watch that?
It's that ADD generation where they skip past all that. It's like, who's this guy again? I'm bored.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, that ends this episode of TGT Media, and of course, this is episode 317. We will be joined by the 5th anniversary of Postscript by by Graham Muxoulis, and another great comic, of course, very
good one,
family friendly. I like it too. And August, of course, is the TGT tournament where we gathered the last 50 episodes and put them into a battle royale where they kill each other for fame prizes and gloating rights. And of course, coming back on the show next year. And the documentary Little Person Among Media Giant, which of course I'm putting together, going to Fan Expo Canada to interview many wonderful people and ask them some of the same questions you heard here, actually, as well, too. So stay tuned for that in about 2 years' time where we'll hit the documentary circuit as well. So
that's so cool.
Thank you so much for that. And that ends this episode.